Welcome, useful content community. If you are struggling to launch and grow your B2B marketing and your media, what am I going to say? Oh, yes. If you're struggling to grow your B2B media, stick around because this week we're honored to have with us content creator and director of audience growth for Sweet Fish, Dan Sanchez, to show us how to build your B2B empire using lean media.
Broadcasting live from Relate Studios in Trinidad and Tobago, it's the Useful Content Creation Show with your host, Juma Bannister.
Oh my, that's 2 weeks in a row I got tongue-tied. Anyway, this is the Useful Content Creation Show where business owners and entrepreneurs come to improve the content they create by educating themselves with useful strategies and tactics in marketing, business, and content creation. My name is Juma Bannister. It's hard to get that wrong. I am your host, and I'm happy to be with you this week. And for those who are in the comments, remember we are the Useful Content Community. And we throw our bulbs up. We own the bulb emoji. Don't forget to drop your bulbs in the comments and drop your hashtag UCC Live. And if you're here on the replay, drop your hashtag UCC Replay. And if you're part of my Facebook group and you're here, this is my 100 and I think we have 30 people now, strong Facebook group. Don't forget to drop Learn with UCC because we're here today to learn a lot of different things from our very esteemed guests. Today, I'm happy to introduce our special guest who is going to teach us useful things on how to launch your B2B media empire with lean media. Welcome to the show, Dan Sanchez.
Thanks for having me on the show. I will say doing a live show is so much braver than me. I do a podcast and we record everything. And if I have a stumble in the beginning, then I'll be like, hold on, let's retake. And live shows, you don't have that luxury. So I applaud you for doing this live. It is no easy feat being able to do it on the moment like this.
Yeah, I think you can never really get like complacent because as soon as you think you have everything down, then you know the tongue ties come in, then you have the internet goes down. So you just always have to be on your feet like 24/7, you know. And some people do live podcasts as well, but you know, live is just definitely something that you can't you never really get used to 100%. You get better at it. Who came up with Dan Sanchez? That was you?
You know, I think about a year and a half ago, personal hashtags were becoming a thing on LinkedIn, and people were coming up with all kinds of creative little hashtags to finish their posts with. And I was like, and I did a poll of like all different kinds that I could use, and one of them was Dan Sanchez. Actually, not the best rated poll in the poll. And I think a few marketers whose opinions that I really trusted were like, hey man, the Dan Sanchez thing, it just can't put my finger on it, but it just rings. You should really double down on that. It had been a nickname that some people had called me, but you know, I've had many nicknames. Some people call me Dan San, Dan Chez, Manchez. You know, it's like there's all these nicknames, and for some reason, a couple of people were like, you should run with that as a thing. And I did. It was just a hashtag, and then so many people liked it that it became a whole personal branding thing. And now more than just my friends call me Dan Chez. It's kind of what I go by now.
All right.
It's funny.
Right. What won the hashtag war?
Sanchez says. I think the alliteration was strong on it, but that one won. But I ended up going with Dan Chez. Sometimes the people vote one way, but you're like, you end up going another. And we'll never know if that would have worked as well. But Dan Chez is a little bit stronger in that it's more unique. As many Sanchez's, not as many Dan Sanchez's.
Yes, there's so many Sanchez's. Every time I try to search for Dan Sanchez, Google corrected me.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a following, but not that big of a following. Hopefully over time, Google will
Yeah,
recognize that there is a Dan Chez and it's not just Sanchez.
yeah. It's great stuff, man. I like it too. I find it has a ring to it. Sanchez. All right, let's see who's down in the comments as we are beginning here. Shania from a Facebook group. Good evening, Shania. Good to be here. Leka knows I can't see her picture. She's from my Facebook group as well. Good to see you, Leka. Harish, good to see you. And Chelsea, all the way from Belize. Good to see you. We have Summer throwing up our bulbs. Hashtag UCC Live. Good to see you as well, Summer. Nice to see the people here in the comments. And so Dan, before we start to talk about the topic at hand today, people may not know who you are. Tell us a bit about yourself and the story of how you became the director of audience growth at Sweet Fish and a content creator.
Dang, like how far back can you go, right?
Yeah.
I love marketing because it collects such a diverse array of people within this career path, right? I know marketers from all different kinds of previous career backgrounds, and some, of course, that have come directly through majoring in marketing. I myself actually came from the graphic design realm and slowly worked my way into marketing, from design to web design to social media to digital marketing to just everything marketing. And then slowly started to unfold like the real power of marketing comes when you can own your own audience. When you can have a crew of people paying attention to what you're saying over and over and over again. Like if you can get that, everything else is just downhill from there. But it's not easy. It's not easy trying to get people onto an email list, to a social following, to having a large YouTube subscriber base. Right. It's not easy to get. So I really started to push heavy into that. And especially being the director of audience growth at Sweet Fish, that became my full-time job, helping our customers grow their podcast audiences. And even coaching them through LinkedIn growth, since most of our customers are B2B. LinkedIn was the biggest social platform for them. So that became the last 2 years. I've done nothing but consulting on how to grow a podcast audience and how to grow following on LinkedIn.
Right. So if you were into so many aspects of marketing, why podcast? How did you end up there?
Honestly, podcast was probably the last channel that I hadn't really touched yet. I don't know, you see the job postings and they're all like these unicorn postings, like, oh, you need to be masters of social, paid ads, AdWords, SEO. You need to know how to design websites, and it'd be great if you know PHP, like they throw everything in there. So you're a young marketer trying to get a better job and you're trying to learn all the skills. Podcasting is one of the last ones I learned. And that's when the founder of Sweet Fish actually introduced me to podcasting when I was trying to talk to him about search engine optimization.
Right.
He's like, hey, we could do SEO, but with podcast based on what you're telling me about this. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it opened me up to podcasting. And what he taught me about podcasting is that a podcasting isn't just a channel to distribute information, though it's that, and you can build a following there and get discovered there. It's also a tool to meet anybody you want to know. He wrote a book called Content-Based Networking, and it actually changed the game for my career, changed the game for me as a marketer. And now it's something I also preach alongside James, is content-based networking, because you can use a show like you are with this one in building relationships with other marketers. Or if you're trying to get a job, you could be using it to build relationships with hiring managers. If you're in B2B sales, you could be using it to build relationships with executives that probably wouldn't give you 10 minutes for that cup of coffee you promised them, right? But if you ask them for 60 minutes for an interview, they're more likely to say okay, right? Because you're shining the spotlight on them, letting their voice be heard. You're adding value to the relationship. And honestly, you're getting a lot of time to build relationship with them. So I found that podcasting was the relational tool in my marketing arsenal that I was missing before. But even then, you still want to be able to grow an audience. So that's when I brought all my other skill sets from all the other digital marketing avenues I'd kind of not perfected, but had gained some skills in over time, and then brought it to podcasting to help other people grow their podcasts.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great process. I was kind of tracking it down, and I realized that James had a really massive influence on where you're at right now, and just the way you think about marketing and stuff like that. And that's great. I haven't read that book, but maybe I should pick it up. And I was also fascinated at your journey as well, like how many things that you've done. Because I too started kind of in graphic design, and and the way in which I could see, I just looked at a tiny bit of your content, and in that short space of time, so many different things happened, and I was just amazed, like, oh, how many things you learn, because you're like a serial learner. So that's cool. And you're an author as well, of one of my most liked books ever to be seen on LinkedIn. It's the kids book.
That's right. How to be a marketer when you grow up. Check it
Be,
out.
how to,
If you
how to
find
be
my
a,
profile, you can actually get it for free, because I'm
yeah.
like, more kids literature just needs to be out there on these things, right?
It's an amazing book. It's an amazing book. Have you anything else in the works right now?
Yeah, I'm working on another book, another kids book. Because while I like the marketer angle, the other thing I wanted to start going into was like how to develop an audience, and teach kids how to develop an audience. Because they did a massive research project a few years ago and found that like the number one things kids want to be when they grow up now is a
Mm-hmm.
YouTuber, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer the rock star. It's no longer the astronaut. Kids between the ages of 8 and 12 all want to be YouTubers. And in the future, it might not even be YouTube. It might be TikTok or some other app that we don't even know about yet. Those are the future stars. And there's a whole crowd, a whole crew of kids that want to learn how to do that. And the hard part is growing the audience. So I'm working on a book now on audience growth for kids to kind of help encourage them in that, show them that there's something there and that there are some periods to go through, like the ghost town phase when no one's listening, that you still have to work through, but it's okay. Everyone goes through it, and getting through those obstacles in order to grow an audience and make a career out of it.
Yeah, and that's your focus these days. I could tell there's like you're doing, so you're reaching into different, and it's good that you're concentrating that one thing. You're shaving off the ends, whittling a little bit, and getting even more and more concentrated in the middle, and in audience growth, according to your name bestowed upon you by James. So it's good stuff. It's good stuff. All right, it's great. So the people know a little bit more about you right now. So let's jump into the other section of things. And but before I do that, I want to ask you the question I ask everyone who comes on the show. And that big question is, what makes your content useful?
Makes my content useful. The content I produce, I try to be helpful. That's a big string for me. I try to be as helpful as possible by answering questions that people have. I also try to be like, this is a really hard one, but I try to be humble in that I'm trying to not just blast everything, which is really hard because sometimes you're like, stop doing this, or this is the way. But to also come back and be like, but there are other ways to do it. This isn't the only way, to try to like give it a little bit more, to season it a little bit more instead of just being so black and white, to give the gradations of that shows that like, hey, like there's other ways this can be done rather than to be so stark. Yeah, but mainly to be those two things, to be as helpful as possible and helping people grow an audience, or in any marketing endeavor, really. I used to post mostly just about marketing, but over time, as a director of audience growth, I've been focused more on that one topic.
Yeah, it's good. And people want that as well. That is a topic that I began to listen to some of this stuff, and I'm like, I'm sinking my teeth into it and like saying, oh, this is great. This is great stuff. And I know that you'll be sharing more and more as time goes along. So I'll be happy to see what content you put out with that specific topic in the future. That should be exciting. All right. So let's jump into the topic. So before we start, I didn't know what lean media is. What is lean media?
Lean media is something I've been trying to find a term for it, and that's kind of what I'm sticking with now. So we've all heard of the lean startup, right?
Mm-hmm.
That term and point of view that like changed a whole industry, right? Before the lean startup, and which was based on a book called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, written by Steve Blank, who's a big time professor at Stanford. Before that whole movement came about, you know how companies used to launch is they would have a great idea and they'd put it into R&D and spend millions of dollars perfecting it. And then they would bring it out to marketing. Marketing would be like, oh, we could sell this. And they'd spend millions more preparing the campaign. And then bam, they'd unveil it and everybody'd be like, ooh, ah. And then it either flopped or it didn't, right? But they never tested it. They'd have very limited market research done. They probably wouldn't even get the product in front of the prospective buyer. They were just launching a whole business model and with infrastructure to support millions of buyers. And oftentimes they failed. And then we discovered the lean startup, right? Which is a great way to start small, have a hypothesis, deliver a minimum viable product, test it, hopefully get product market fit and build out your funnels and then scale it, right? And that's become the startup model for 20, 30 years now. But we don't apply that to media nearly as well as we should. What if instead of doing customer discovery, we did audience discovery? What if we took that same methodology that startups have been using to develop great products for a while now and applied it to our content marketing? Start with a hypothesis and think about your content like that. We're just testing. We're testing our way into it. What is the market we're addressing and what are the problems they're facing? How do we solve that with our content? It's just a hypothesis. Treat it as such. Test it. Post it. See if it resonates with people on specific channels. You might have to try different channels, just like you would have to try different channels for selling a product. But the point is, you want to get to, instead of product market fit, media market fit. Too often, I've seen B2B companies do it all the time. And even with podcasting, a lot of our customers will have a solid idea. It seems good, but they haven't tested it. It's not like they were doing it on a different platform and brought it into podcasting. If you did, it would probably work in podcasting. But they have an idea, they launch it, and then they just keep doing it and doing it and doing it and do it until maybe budget cuts come. And then they cut it or not. They're not sure if it's working. But they just have an idea, launch it, and then just continue doing it, which is why we run into so many B2B companies that have blogs that nobody reads. And we have CEOs posting to LinkedIn that get no likes or comments. And we have podcasts that are just ramblings of nothing out there forever and ever, because we never really came down to the root of who are we talking to? What's their problem? Did it resonate with them? Does it work for this channel? Did we actually get to a point where it was starting to resonate enough that we knew we had a good fit, that we could start putting some ad dollars to scale this thing out? So that's kind of what I'm proposing as lean media. Because you don't have to go all in and spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to build out your full studio and build this really robust YouTube content series or a podcast that costs $30,000 an episode. And there are some people who do that. That's not a Sweet Fish cost. I wouldn't call them a competitor, but there are production studios that charge that. You don't have to go into it that heavy in order to know and build something that's worthwhile.
Yeah, why do that when you could just get some shower cap tin lights and set it up and keep it real simple. I mean, I love the whole fact that you are talking about testing things, that you don't have to go all in. You could take some time and test it, see what resonates, and then you could take that up, take the good parts, throw away the bad parts, and continue to build as you go along. So it's not, the investment is worth your while because you're discovering things as you put out the content, and I love that whole idea of doing that. Also, so that's what lean media is. Now I know. Now I'm clear. Okay, great. Now that we know what lean media is, because we're going to talk about lean media some more. So why would any business even care about building a media empire? Isn't that a bit over the top?
It sounds a little bit over the top until you think about who has the attention and how most companies are going about getting attention. Most of them, and this was me just 5 years ago, are dependent on paid media. And if you're like me, you were riding that Facebook ad train, like, man, that was just making money. the cost per acquisition on Facebook ads was just so good for so many years. And then it started to get expensive. And maybe around 2018, I started to get nervous about this, right? I think most of us who were paying attention, who had been riding it since 2015, 2014, started to notice oh, this is not a good trajectory. I was getting patted on the back for all the all the leads and marketing and revenue I was growing, but I knew there was a major problem. It's that Facebook turned the ads off, or if they became way more expensive from just more competition coming in or whatever, there was going to be a problem. I was dependent on Google ads and Facebook ads, and mostly Facebook ads. And I had no other source to turn to. But what if we had what if we could diversify away from just paid media and have our own owned media? Think about even some big companies like Walgreens. Why wouldn't they just buy WebMD? Okay. Their ad budget is so big that they could probably afford just the operating cost of WebMD. Actually, I've looked at both of their P&Ls. I'm like, yeah, based on their marketing spend, they could probably just buy WebMD as an investment, and they could literally just rub WebMD and be the sole advertiser forever.
All right. So for those who don't know, so Walgreens is a pharmacy, or drugstore as they call it, and then WebMD is a
WebMD is the most popular, at least in the States. It's the most popular source of information for all medical searches on Google. So if you're searching, what does it mean when my feet itch or whatever it is, like WebMD is often one of the first sites that comes up. So because of that, WebMD just has a massive amount of web traffic coming to it. And they have advertisers and stuff. They make their money through ads. I'm sure they have other ad revenues. But Walgreens is so much larger of a company than WebMD. They're in the billions. WebMD's in the hundreds of millions as far as revenue goes. So you're starting to see, I know some companies are buying out media platforms like that, like Amazon bought the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Right. That was a big acquisition. HubSpot bought the Hustle newsletter, another big acquisition. And smaller down, Outreach, which is a smaller startup than HubSpot, bought Sales Hacker, which was a really popular blog and podcast. Even though they already had their own blog and podcast, they're buying communities out instead of using a lean approach to grow it. They're just buying them. But unless you have that much cash around, you're going to have to grow it in order to offset your dependence on paid media. Not that I'm against paid media either. I think it's great. I'd actually use paid media to drive your own owned media, but better to be the one, or like James and I say, the one with the attention has all the leverage.
Right.
So get attention, grow your own audience. That way other people come to you instead of you trying to beg or pay to be on someone else's platform.
Yeah. I agree with that. Get the attention and all the rest of it. Then you get some earned media from that. You earn other attention and it amplifies and multiplies itself. And if you get that, then you definitely could increase the possibility of leads and more business, etc. That's good stuff. I like that. And how does one start to test? I know we talked about testing before, but how do you go about doing that? Like testing your way into what channels work and what doesn't work with this lean media approach?
There's a couple of different ways to go about it. So I find that most people either start of one or two positions. Either you already have some thought leadership, like you're already well established in your space and you have great ideas that have resonated before. You just don't have a social following. Maybe you already speak. Maybe you're already a subject matter expert and you already know a lot. That's great. You should just start posting. And one, you should be having conversations with your audience so you know what their real pain points are. Because sometimes as an expert, we're removed from the pain points of the beginners who are the buyers, right? Because if they were also an expert, they might not need to hire you or buy your product because they're also experts. You need to get back in touch with their pain points in order to answer their questions, the things they wrestle with the most, and break that up into small pieces of content on the platform where your audience spends the most time. If you're in a B2B situation, that's probably LinkedIn is the best place to kind of like test the waters with what topics work well. But if you're not in the place where you're a subject matter expert, maybe you're a content marketer, then the way to go about it, since you're not a subject matter expert, maybe you're writing for engineers, it could be a little harder, is to go the route of what I call the journalist, or student. You are going on a discovery. You're asking questions and you're starting a show like this one, either live, maybe a YouTube, maybe a podcast. I like podcasting because I think it's the easier one of the three. And interviewing the subject matter experts in order to create content, learn yourself, and build a brand around yourself as now essentially a bit of a journalist and an explorer into the topic. And the more you do it, the more you become associated as an expert in the topic, since you're rubbing shoulders with all the experts. And that way you can kind of find out piece by piece what people are interested in as you learn yourself. A lot of people say build in public on the product side, right? Build your product in public. You can also, what I call learn in the light, because
I like
you can, I've had people with like PhDs come and ask me to be on the podcast before, our own podcasts, and they're like, oh, I wrote this book. I'm a PhD. This is great. I have a revolutionary idea. I'm like, yeah, but I've never heard of you. I don't know you. I don't even know if that school exists that you got a PhD from. I don't know. I'm not going to have you on the show. It's not even what the topic we're covering right now anyway. But, and they might have had some great ideas, but I don't know them. But even if you know nothing, if people watch you grow, I say this is kind of corny, but they'll know that you know, right?
Right.
They watched you go from not knowing anything and asking really good questions and having great conversations in the comments and showing up and interviewing them. And then they're interviewing them. And then they're having some really good ideas like, hey, if this is true and this is true, how could this also be true, right? They're starting to actually share their learnings and how they're applying it where people can read it, which would be, again, on a social media platform there on the podcast. If you're a podcaster, I always like to recommend in between interviews doing solo episodes to share your learnings along the way.
Yeah.
So people can join you in the journey. And then after dozens of episodes and hundreds of posts, people are going to know that you know. They've been watching you grow the whole time. You started off not knowing anything, but you're going to finish knowing something. And people you'll have built-in credibility with them. But you don't have to hire a team of journalists to create a Washington Post or a big news media entity. You can start small. You can start as a content marketer. Just think of yourself as a journalist and build your way there. And then as that media entity grows, hopefully, you're building it out, you're testing your hypothesis and modifying your content until you hit media market fit. Then you can grow and hire more people, more interviews, and hopefully you're becoming subject matter experts to push your ideas and thoughts about how things could be better. And that's kind of how you do it piece by piece.
That's fantastic. It resonates with me. I love the term building in the light for several reasons. Probably we'll talk about that when the show ends. I love that terminology, building in the light. And also, so it sounds very similar to I kind of refer to this as community iteration, where you release something into your well, I have a Facebook group. I release some content into my Facebook group, and I'll look at the comments, look at the feedback, and see what people say, and then we iterate the content over and over in that space. The people who are in the group get benefits, and I get a benefit because I know how to fine tune that based on these are my ideal people inside here, and then I could release it publicly or do something else with it, whether that's a course or whatever I decide I want to do with the content after there.
Every long form channel needs a short form channel for you to kind of ideate with and have conversations, right? Without that, you just can't go very far. I often take my LinkedIn profile and just post an idea like, hey, what does everybody think about this? Is this a thing?
Right.
And people will be like, no, that's not a thing. You'll be like, oh, I ain't doing a podcast episode on that now. Or they'll be like, hey, I think you have something here. You'll develop it farther. Bam, there's an episode.
I have a question to ask you now, but before I do, let me just reference the comments right here and say what Kareem was saying. Oh, Black American in Asia checking in. Hey, Kareem, good to see you from the Philippines. And Janelle is saying, I like the book. It's a good resource for students doing business subjects and for those searching for career guidance, etc. Lots of young people are starting businesses, and this is palatable resource. Congrats. Looking forward to the other books. Dan started following you on LinkedIn as well. Nice. Thank you, Janelle.
Oh, nice. It was the marketing book. I thought it was James's content-based networking.
Oh, no, it's your book. And then Kareem was like saying, yes, Facebook screwed us. So why you gotta be like that, Kareem? And is it learning in the light? That's what you said. You said learning, not building in the light. You said learning in the light. Okay, yeah.
Some people call it build in public. If you're building a product in public, like you're testing it out. I call it learning in the light because it's more audience focused. Like you're learning and growing your expertise in where everyone can see.
All right, that's good. That's good. These are people from my Facebook group. Facebook doesn't allow these pictures sometimes unless you change your setting. Hello, people from Facebook. How are you doing? Useful content community. Good to see you. All right, so let's get back to that idea, that thought you were kind of floating about, you putting out the idea and people saying that is not a thing. So I guess you would agree that that challenges make people grow, yes?
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you think that the people on LinkedIn don't give enough resistance in a form of respectful disagreement to promote growth in the people who are sharing their content?
I think they do.
You think they
Maybe
do?
it's just me, but like if I say something that's like too strong, I have people call me out all the time, and they do it in a way that's respectful. Like 99% of the time. Every once in a while, like 1 in 100 will be like, I don't know, is literally just arguing for the point of arguing, but it's pretty rare.
Mm,
That's more Twitter. Like if you want people to argue with you just to argue,
right,
that's your
right.
platform. On LinkedIn, people are pretty kind, and will go into it with you in the comments in a good way. But also, you just because they disagree with you and say like that, I don't know, that's bull. Like be like, oh, okay, well, what about it's bull? Like this part or this part? Oh, that part.
Yes,
Well, tell me
yes, yes.
about that. Can you give me a few examples? I sincerely want to know. And all of a
Mm,
sudden, maybe they were just kind of being haughty in the keys when they responded. But if you just approach them with a humble approach, be like, no, tell me more, then you actually end up in really helpful dialogue because sometimes you're wrong. And
mhm.
sometimes you become only more like firm in your opinion. You're like, I hear you, but nah, this is the right thing, And there's many opinions I've backed down from over the last 2 years because of good LinkedIn conversations. And there's certainly been some I've only become more resolved in.
Though that I find that to be such a massive deal that people don't talk about more. And the fact that you could admit that you've backed down and it's caused you to change, and the way in which you're describing this humble pursuit of accuracy, as what I would call it, is so great. And I wish more people would do that, because as opposed to um I don't like the necessarily, if you agree, no problem. There's some people who generally agree and they like your content and they will come to learn from you. So they are learning from you. So therefore it's hard for them to detect when something is off. But then there are people who know more than you. And they could respectfully disagree with someone. And I would do the same thing you would do, is like ask, well, why is this incorrect? Why is this? You tell me why, based on your knowledge. Because I might not be an expert in that field. I might be just learning and I have a interesting perspective, but it may not be fully formed. And I love that you said that. That is great. That's a great approach, and I wish more people would do that.
I think it's a lot more fun to do it that way. I don't know. I feel like everyone's working remote. We're all working from our own home offices. I'm like, where else am I going to have dialogue and talk shop with people if not on LinkedIn
Yeah,
comments?
yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
Like
For
my
real,
community is out there. Let's talk shop.
for real, for real. Yeah, that's what it is. It's like I mean no disrespect if I say this, and it's not every single time that I come to just say agree 100%, and just sometimes I'm like, well, why? I ask why, because I really do genuinely want to know why. So I think that is part of what you call talking shop, and just kind of chopping it up with the people who are the experts, and not that we're calling people out, we just want to know why sometimes. That's good stuff. That's really excellent. So you kind of talk about using existing content channels and kind of evaluating them, and figuring out what you'd want to do in order to build out this empire. Can you talk to us a bit about how that process goes?
How to build out
Well,
how to build it out per channel.
well, specifically, how do you decide which channels to go all in on?
I generally, unless you're a really large company, like if you're below 10 million, you usually should just stick to 2 channels. And even as your own, even if you have a own side hustle and it's just your personal brand, 2 channels. I just find that it's really hard to do really well on more than 2 without a substantial amount of resources. And even if I did have a substantial amount of resources, I would probably want to just get 2 running first. It's just hard to break through the noise on more than 1 at a time. And I find that 2 does best, especially if one is dedicated to like short form content and the other one's long form content. So Twitter and YouTube, LinkedIn and podcasts, TikTok and a blog, for example, like blog, YouTube, and podcast being like the most common long form content. There's other versions of that too, like a webinar. If you do a lot of webinars, that could be long form content. And LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook being your more short form content platform.
Right.
You kind of need both to create synergy because one's promotional, and we're not promotional as in you're promoting your product, but you can give the short snippets and get more dialogue going. On the long form, you can deliver more solid ideas that builds up more authority around your thinking, right? Because sometimes even though you can have a little pithy post on LinkedIn, it doesn't let people like really dig into how to execute your whole thing, your whole idea, right? It's just one little part of it. So you really need people to get into, to really build loyalty. You want to give them an avenue to like consume more substantial media, like a 30-minute podcast, a 10-minute YouTube video, or a more lengthy blog post. And I find doing those two and focusing only on those two and either ignoring or automating the rest kind of frees up enough time for you to put in the amount of work that it actually takes to break into one of those and do well.
So you're not for jumping on new channels to try them when they come out. You just kind of say, well, and I'm not gonna touch that. I'm just gonna leave it alone and continue along the way. What causes you to explore a new channel, even though you have two already? What would cause you to do that?
Sometimes an opportunity comes along that you can't really ignore. For example, when Clubhouse came, Clubhouse was hot for just a short minute, right? And because Clubhouse was audio first and we were a podcasting company, Sweet Fish, we were like, and it was really hot on LinkedIn. Like people were talking about Clubhouse on LinkedIn all the time.
Yeah.
James and I went in and hit Clubhouse really hard for 1 month in March. Not even this last March, but like of 2021, and hit it hard, and we used it to record podcasts. So we weren't just, we were still putting all that content to use in our other channels and promoting it on LinkedIn, but we found it just didn't work as well as we wanted it to. So we kind of gave up on it within a month. We kind of tested it, said it didn't work, and then we put it away.
Right.
Now Sweet Fish, we already have other content channels. Like we have a very successful podcast. We do really well with LinkedIn across multiple profiles. So we've actually gone into activating a new channel, and that's TikTok. We have one team member that's gone really hard at that you just interviewed, I think last week, right, Emily? And she's done fantastic in exploring TikTok. So if you find you've got both two channels that are doing relatively well and you can keep them doing well, then you might want to start testing out new channels. But I'd tell until you have two channels going really well and you have a pretty healthy subscriber base in either, or you're just getting the reach that you'd want to see, then you'll be like most marketers if you just keep going after channel of channel, because most marketers are just looking at shiny object syndrome all the time. And maybe not them, but it's the CEO or their boss, right? Being like, oh, we need to try this. Oh, we need to try this. Oh, have we tried this? Hey, I just read this blog. What if? Right? So many marketers are stuck trying to do too many things. I interviewed 100 marketers, and the most common answer to what's the greatest obstacle you're facing with your team is they said many things, but the resounding, like, overarching problem they all had was distraction.
Right.
Not enough focus. Too many things to do. Not enough money, not enough talent to go around, which all says you're trying to do too much, too many channels.
And for you, I guess, or you would kind of always recommend podcasts, or do people come to you and say, I want to do a podcast, and then you realize you don't need a podcast, you just need to go do something else? Does that happen frequently?
I mean, if they come to me wanting to do a podcast, I'm probably going to recommend a podcast unless they're I don't know, their average contract size is really small, and it's almost always B2B companies coming to me. If it's a B2C company, we just turn them away. Even if they have the budget and want to do a podcast, we're like, nah. We've turned down some big B2C companies, which is too bad, but you got to stay focused. If their contract size is larger, then I almost always recommend pushing them to a podcast. Blogging is probably going to be more beneficial and doing SEO really well if your average contract size, like if you're selling into like, you're selling an app that costs $10 a month, $100 a month, like in that range, then SEO is going to be a much better bet, and you should probably invest in blogging, good blogging, not like
Right.
the commodity content blogging, like substantial blogs that win rankings, is going to be much more efficient for their business model.
Right. Right. How important is expertise in building out your media empire?
In a B2B sense, it's substantial. In a B2C sense, it's not. There's other ways to do it other than expertise, because people subscribe to channels for more than just learning. But in B2B, generally people are there to learn something, rarely to be entertained. So most B2B channels and business content is educational in nature. So in order for you to be educated, you kind of have to have a strong expertise, unless you're teaching very beginner content and you're doing it in a very entertaining way. Like if somebody created a marketing 101 course on YouTube and made it really entertaining, that's probably a gap there that no one's really addressed yet. That could be a channel, especially if you're trying to attract that kind of an audience. But most B2B companies I work with are trying to attract the attention of directors and VPs of marketing, or, like the director, VP, and C-level officers, because they have the budgets in order to buy their thing. So generally you have to bring subject matter expertise to the table in order to attract that kind of crowd. That needs to be substantial. It needs to not just be, we've tried some stuff. It's coming from a place of expertise, and it's unique points of view that are very compelling to the audience, which means they have to be new. You have to have some new ideas that are interesting to them.
Okay, great. Wonderful. All right. So is there anything you want to add on to the end as we bring this in for a landing, talking about how to build this media empire?
If you're listening now, I would just say, start with a hypothesis, and everybody's got a hypothesis, but actually write it out. This is the audience that I'm going after, and try to narrow it as much as possible. This is always the hardest part. The more narrow you can get in your audience, the better. And then the best part about a podcast is you can literally just go and interview your audience. So if you have a means to do this, you can also do this for a blog or a YouTube channel. But I promise, if you're just getting started with this idea, there's nothing better than using a content or interview-based content in order to start building your expertise, but really to get to know the audience so that you can then speak to their problems. One of the reasons why I've even been able to grow on LinkedIn myself at all is because I was interviewing my ideal buyers all the time. So I had a good sense of their problems, or what kept them up at night, or things they were going through, or things they thought were worthwhile in their careers right now, or books they were reading, influencers they were listening to. Because I've talking to them all the time, I knew what to write about. Get in front of them by interviewing them and giving them the spotlight. That's how you add value, and that's how you get a sense of what they actually want to hear for you to then serve content to.
That's great. And I found that to be brilliant, by the way. I heard you say that before, and I found that to be brilliant. It's like, oh, this should really, and you even talked about the naming of the podcast, obviously. And you kind of named the podcast after the thing that your ideal buyer desires. And I've heard you say that. I think it's really, really brilliant. Could you speak to that one? Just that last thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a common problem, or a common miss that people have when they start a podcast, is to name it after them and their expertise, which could work, but it's better to think about like your ideal buyer. Like, why not just name it after their title? Like if I were trying to sell to directors of IT, right? I could just call it the IT director show or the intelligent IT director, something that's aspirational, like, oh, they want to be seen as intelligent. Of course, every different position has something they want to be seen as. We have a customer that is a trademark lawyer that started a podcast, not about trademark law, but her podcast name is The Innovative Agency, because she's trying to attract, CEOs of agencies to come and speak on her podcast. And they'd all love to be associated with a podcast called The Innovative Agency, because they all want to be seen as innovative agencies. Right. So it's clear. And while you could come up with a probably more clever name that's still clear, it's a lot harder. So it's better to be clear rather than clever. Clever dies all the time because people don't get it, but clear will always win. Right.
That's fantastic. I agree with that so much. Clear over clever. And let me just post this thing from Kareem. I know we're not going to talk about this, but let me just show what Kareem is saying. That hard to know who is our ideal client or clients. so many need help today. There is a way to know, Kareem. We're not going to dive into it now because we're going to go to the other segment. Maybe we could circle back to this. I'm going to use some corporate speak. We could circle back to this at some point. But there's a way to know that for sure. All right, so Dan, now that we've talked about this part, let's just jump into a segment real quick called Agree, Disagree. This is a segment where I make some statements and you can tell me if you agree or disagree. Is that cool?
This is fun. I'm excited. I haven't done this before.
Okay, let's do it. Agree, disagree with Dan Sanchez. All right, agree, disagree. These are general statements. These are not statements that I agree or disagree with, but some of them are specific to you. So you will just let me know if you agree or disagree. This one is one that I ask everyone who comes on the show, and you let me know. So agree, disagree. Passion before skill.
Disagree.
Oh, that sigh was so loud. You almost caused a tornado. Why disagree?
I don't know. I find I get more excited about things as I learn about them. I wasn't passionate about gardening, but I'm a new homeowner and I've been reading about gardening. I'm becoming more interested in it. As I gain a skill around it, I become more interested in it. So I'm like, I don't know, passion can follow.
Mm-hmm. You know, that this question has gotten so, I mean, I think it's split down the center as of now. Like if you go back and review the footage, people are split and they say it for different reasons, and always reflective of the personal process, which we like that people express their personal process inside of this answer. It's interesting perspectives, but it's very, very interesting. And I can relate to because I did my own landscaping as well by my house. So, you know, that was the thing. Agree, disagree. Good design is a combination of good visuals and a clear message.
In visual design, I think design's a broader topic, right? I agree.
Okay, good. So I should have said graphic design, you think?
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay. Agree, disagree. And we touched on this. Having many options is the bane of creative people.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. I think anybody who's out there who's creative now will be like kind of shaking their head vigorously with a yes, because trust me, I've seen it happen. It happened to me, and it's happened over and over again to people I know. And that is why it's so hard to build things over a period of time, because you just need to focus. And I'm sure moving from graphic design to where you are now, you found that the more you focus, the more you actually grow.
Oh yeah. And the more limitations you can put on it, the easier it gets to be creative sometimes, right?
Yes. And we learned that even in doing photography. You know, that's another story. I'm going to get into that, but yes. Agree, disagree. The Oprah Effect is much more effective than advertising.
Absolutely. We talk about the Oprah Effect all the time in podcasting.
For people who don't know, could you explain what the Oprah Effect is?
I'm hoping we have the same definition, but to us, we call the Oprah Effect the effect that the perception people have of you as the host when you interview experts over and over again, is that even though you're shining the spotlight on the experts, the Oprah Effect is that expertise starts to come back on you, even though you've done nothing but ask questions the whole time. People will start to go to be like, oh, I had no idea you were so good at this. You're like, dude, I've just been showing up and asking questions. It happens. We call it the Oprah Effect.
All right. And so the lesson is learn how to ask questions well. Learn how to ask good questions.
That's
true.
Know,
and
there's a skill there.
There is a skill to be learned right there. Okay. Agree, disagree. No one who calls themselves a thought leader is actually a thought leader.
Agree. Absolutely. Right. I've never heard an actual thought leader say that about themselves.
Yeah. You know, people define that, you know, I am a thought leader. You know, that, you know. This is an interesting one. Agree, disagree. Your expertise is relative to the audience.
Yes, I mean, I don't know. Your expertise is your expertise. Only a certain segment of the population is going to recognize that expertise.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's like a whole trend on TikTok, like show me something that's a flex to a very small group of people. It's kind of like answering
Right.
that, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's a very niche group of
Um,
people. Yes.
but still, I mean, it's kind of like if a tree falls in the wood, does it make a sound? Your expertise is still there, even if only a small amount of people actually recognize it, right?
Right. And I would say also that when you start something, you are building expertise. But as we were kind of discussing before, it's almost like if you're iterating, if you're learning in the light, then the people who are learning with you you're learning, and then they're also learning as well. So you grow. It's like it's connect. The two things are pegged together in terms of growth. And I found that to be interesting too, where you may not know everything, but you know enough to teach someone who knows less.
Yep.
So it's relative in that way.
It's different than authority though, because authority is how many people actually like follow your expertise and trust your expertise, right? You can be an expert and have a PhD and no one knows who you are, but you can have no degrees and have a lot of authority in an area just because of other reasons, right?
Yes.
Like Gary Vee, no degrees. I guess he has a bachelor's degree, but like he has a lot of authority.
Yeah, because he built that. You're just selling
Yeah,
wine.
he did it. He built a whole empire.
Yeah, he built it. He's just talked a lot about the right things, and and of course he has a very strong personal brand, and now everybody wants to be Gary Vee for some reason. It's just interesting. Okay, so agree, disagree. Businesses need both content marketing and account-based marketing.
No, disagree.
Oh, tell me why.
Well, not everybody needs to do account-based marketing. Account-based marketing is great, but it's one way to do it. And you don't need content marketing either. You could still win without doing content marketing. Shoot, there's businesses that don't even have websites still. I know it sounds hard to believe, but there are businesses out there without a freaking website. You're like, how do you do that? It's 2022. How do you not have a website? They're out there. They're hard to find because they don't even have a website. But I run into them every once in a while. You bump into them, people on the airport, and you like Google them later, and then there's no website.
Right.
They exist. So, I mean, there's just so many different ways to do business. Shoot, a farm is practically a business. So
Right.
I guess a business is a really broad topic. If we're talking about like B2B tech companies, then do you need to do both of them? No, I still think you could do one or the other or both.
Right.
Content marketing is pretty broad too. I think most account-based marketing is going to include some content marketing, but you don't have to do account-based marketing to do content marketing. So,
right. Interesting. And lastly, agree, disagree. And this is the one that we ask everyone who comes on the show. On social media, you grow more from doing rather than consuming.
Oh yeah, that's an easy one. I agree.
Yeah. I give you a layup on the last one to make sure that you end on a good note. And that was Agree, Disagree with Dan Sanchez on the Useful Content Creation Show. And we only have one more thing to do before we wrap up for the evening. The last thing that we have to do before we wrap up for the evening is do the community question. I normally ask my Facebook group, what do they want to ask the expert coming on to the show? And we only had one question from Rhonda this week, which is a very broad question, but is an interesting question because you could answer it many ways. And the question Rhonda asked was, what makes a great podcast?
It's funny, you could define a great podcast by the amount of downloads it gets or the amount of reach that it has. But I'd say a great podcast isn't a great podcast. It's a favorite podcast, right? We all have our favorite thing. What's your favorite podcast? Why is it your favorite? It's usually because it resonates with you on some kind of like deeper level. It's not just teaching you, but it's like, it grabs your soul in some kind of way. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like a highly produced, entertaining thing. I mean, Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, is one of my favorite podcasts. And it's just literally a dude talking to a mic for 5 hours on history. It sounds boring, but it's fantastic. Check it out. the way he talks and what things he talks about is just fantastic. So how do you become your audience's favorite podcast? How do you speak to their not just their questions, but the beliefs they have behind their questions, right? How do you resonate with them on a deeper level to become their favorite thing? That's a great podcast. If you have a crew of a few hundred, maybe a few thousand, and it's their favorite podcast, that's a great podcast. And it doesn't take a large audience. It just takes a small committed crew that's like their favorite thing. That's a great podcast.
Yeah, I like that. So we're not aiming for greatness. We're aiming to be the choice or to be the favorite of some group of people. And that to some degree gives you some level of stability when there is a group of people there's a group of people who will faithfully listen to this because they get value from it. It's interesting. That's good stuff, man. Good stuff. Rhonda, I hope that helps. I hope that was answered. That was the Facebook group. We're going to take questions for the Facebook group again next week. Thank you so much. And lastly, Dan, where can the people find you if they want to get in touch with you to ask you about more B2B growth stuff and building their media empire?
Great. 2 places. LinkedIn, it's where I'm the most active. LinkedIn.com/IN/digital marketing Dan. And you can also find me on my website and find all the relevant links at danchez.com, where I also publish lots of blogs and articles and where I put all my podcasts.
Right. Let me add this banner here, danchez.com. Danchez. Pretty simple. Very, very straightforward. I love that you got that and you chose that one. Sanchez says, Danchez. So Sanchez said, Danchez.
It's a meme. Oh, man,
yeah, it's a meme right there for you. Okay, so excellent, people. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. And thank you, the Facebook group. Let me just throw this banner up here real quick. If you want to be part of the Facebook group, you can always go to the Useful Content Community and go to Facebook and groups and go to the Useful Content Community. You see the link down there. Thank you, Dan, for being with us this evening and having this discussion with us live. I know it's not usually a jam, but you did excellently. And I'll see you around on the platform. Bye, Useful Content Community. Thank you for being here. And we'll see you next time on the Useful Content Creation Show. Bye, everyone.